Hello, everyone. In today's episode, I'm talking to my friend and dog training colleague Kayla Fratt about looking at the crashing world and wondering what the heck we are doing with our lives, and whether doing something entirely different would have more of an impact. Let me start you out with a dog story, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. Of course, this is one more puppy story. Last week, the fifth of the puppies, Chispa, my favorite, moved out. She was the last one to leave. I loved her because she was so happy every morning she woke up and saw me. Like her entire body was wagging and her little bat ears went back and her face melted into an excitingly panting big smile of happy. She went to Miguel in Hirotzingo. She's the only puppy I won't get digital uptapes from because Miguel doesn't have a cell phone, but that's the more reason to keep visiting my favorite small town. All the dogs who all will have good lives, hers is going to be the most wild and precious one, and the one I myself, if I was a dog, would choose. I'll be sure to share more about Chispa and her siblings in an episode all about the puppies. I just don't know yet how I want to structure that one. For now, without further ado, Kayla and I and the world in crisis.
What are we talking about? We're talking about, being a mission-oriented person in a really complicated world and navigating wanting to make the world a better place, but not always being able to be... We can't be everywhere all at once, and we can't do everything. So I think that's the main theme today. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. Well put into it.
Yeah, we try. So, Caden, if people from my listenership don't know who you are, would you be able to go ahead and introduce yourself? And then I guess I can give myself a brief introduction for your listeners as well.
Sounds good. I'm Caden. I'm based in Mexico City. I train dogs for a living. That's partly through Fancy Dog Sports Academy and partly through private students online and in person here. Yeah, that's my greatest source of joy and my passion. And currently, I'm raising a litter of puppies.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the two adult dogs you've got? And I guess which one of them has the puppies?
Yeah, I've got a border collie who just turned out to be a border collie mix because I finally got her embarked.
Oh, really? What is she?
She's 70-something% border collie, and then like equal parts Aussie and what they call super mutt.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I was just curious. I just took her in as a foster a little over a year ago, I think, and then fell in love with her and decided to keep her. And my other dog is Game, a Malinois, and she's the mother of the puppies.
Yeah, and so we might hear some puppy squeaking in the background, but just enjoy the ambiance of some happy, fast-grown little nuggets.
Yeah, would you also introduce yourself for my audience?
Totally. Yeah, my name is Kayla Fratt, and I am a PhD student at Oregon State University, where I'm in the wildlife biology program. Technically, the department is Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation. And I work with conservation detection dogs. So for my two PhD projects, I'm going to be going up to Alaska here in 8 days to use the dogs to find wolf scat and answer questions about diet and movement in this really cool island archipelago. And then I'm also currently grant writing and fundraising to do a project down in El Salvador, looking at the recolonization of pumas down there and what that is doing to the mesocarnivores, so like the ocelots and the jaguarundis and the teiras and those smaller carnivores that are going to experience some competition and potentially predation from these pumas as they're coming back in. And I share my life with two border collies and a cat. So I've got Barley, who's my 10-year-old border collie. He's like my main working dog. He's coming with me to Alaska. And Niffler is my understudy dog. He's also a border collie. And he's actually currently in Wyoming, so a couple states over to the east of me now, helping out on a wind farm project along with my co-founder, Rachel. And then we've got a cat, Norbert, that I found in a ditch, and his main job is working as a non-consenting alarm clock, in that he's consenting to being an alarm clock, but no one else is consenting to the experience. So yeah, it's a good time over.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I didn't know you were, I mentioned you were looking into doing something in El Salvador, but I didn't know it had concretized to that extent already. Cool.
Yeah, we're still, as I said, we're still grant writing. I've got one big grant. It's actually not even that much money, but it's a prestigious grant out that I'm hoping to hear about in the next couple months, and then another grant that's due in a couple weeks. So that's what I'm doing as soon as we're done podcasting, and what I was doing up until the moment we hit record, basically. Yeah, and I know, I guess when I first reached out to you about this feeling that I was having lately, do you experience this feeling as well of like you're dedicating your life to something that you love and you feel really is really important, but do you ever feel like it's not enough, or have you managed to find more peace in than I have?
I constantly catch myself nodding at you and forget that my camera isn't working.
Uh-huh.
Yes, I actually, like, a couple years ago kind of had this. I read The Uninhabitable Earth
Mm.
and had a crisis of like, oh my god, what am I doing? Like, this is completely meaningless. I need to
Mm-hmm.
do bigger, more important things. Back then, I reached out to a friend of mine who is a climate activist and is very involved in climate advocacy and clean energy data and stuff like that, and asked, like, what do I do? What do I do with this
Uh-huh.
feeling? And I had like two ideas in my mind, because at that point I was like, I need to do something else. That's not like, I can't like sit here and play with puppies while the
Mm-hmm.
world is going to shit. And my friend, I posed two ideas to him, and one was like, do you think I should just change fields completely and see if I can somehow get involved in fighting the climate crisis? Or do you think I should just work more and like funnel the money that I'm making into supporting projects that seem important to me?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, I think if you want to do this, your involvement would be more important, like would mean more than the money. And the money thing is like, it would mean working more, because I generally am anti-capitalist and I only work as much as I have to.
Yeah.
So if I want to be able to donate a bunch of money, I would have to work more, right?
Yeah.
So then I was like, okay, I'm trusting this friend's opinion. I'm going to look around what's out there. And I also reached out to Susan Schneider, who you may know. She's both into, like, heavily involved in the behavior world and
Mm-hmm.
also in climate action, to ask, because we had met at a conference and connected there like a decade ago,
Yeah.
and asked for her opinion, or where I, with my relatively limited knowledge, could potentially fit in. And she gave me a couple organizations, and I also found one. At that point, I lived in Guatemala still,
Mm-hmm.
and I found a local organization. And yeah, like, I reached out to everyone, and the only organization that was interested in working with me was that local Guatemalan organization.
Oh, uh-huh.
They are a teal organization, which is pretty cool, which was the first time I heard that term. Have you heard that?
No, I don't know what
It's a
I don't know
very,
what that
like, it's
means.
basically a super flat hierarchy.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, and it's about empowering young members of marginalized communities to take sustainable action, both for their communities and in a bigger sense as well.
Mm-hmm.
And very interactive, very looking at behavior change. And they were like, oh, we could use someone who consults on how to change human behavior, so that our youth leaders can help, for example, change or inspire older members of their community to move more into the direction of sustainable farming, for example.
Uh-huh.
Or like even things like throwing things into a trash can rather than dropping them in the street, stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, like, I mean, in theory, that's totally, like, I could totally come up with ideas for that,
Mm-hmm.
because behavior is behavior.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and
Um,
like the trash example is such a good one. I remember we talked about this with the folks at Action for Cheetahs in Kenya, out in Samburu. One of the things that they were working on was there was a group of women that had kind of started organizing to do trash pickups after market day. And what they ended up kind of realizing was a huge part of the reason that they had to do these trash pickups after market day every week was because there weren't trash facilities available. There was nowhere to put the plastic that your food came wrapped in or whatever. So, they started working to actually get trash bins together so that everything could be collected and didn't get blown away. And then it could get disposed of properly. And out there, that generally means burying or burning it. As a dog trainer, you're familiar with the idea of antecedent arrangement. Like, if there is nowhere to put trash, some proportion of people are not going to put their own trash in their own pockets or in their own backpacks. And especially when you're talking about, a situation like a market, there has to be a solution that sets people up for success. And that's something that as a dog trainer, we're familiar with.
Exactly. This particular problem is really easy to solve. It's just you put up more trash cans. Because we humans recognize trash cans as targets. And like if you have, I'm thinking of a bag of dog poop and you see a target, well, you're going to put the bag of dog poop into the target. Here, like when I walk the streets, there are very few trash cans in my neighborhood. But everyone does pick up the dog poop. They just leave it at some random corner in its bag, which is interesting to me. But if there were trash cans, they would throw it in. Anyways, I think in this case in Guatemala, we could argue that whether someone drops a bottle in the street or puts it in a trash can really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But the sense in which that matters is that a lot of trash gets burned, also by individuals. That can lead to an increased risk of forest fires. That is all kinds of stuff being released into the atmosphere. So that's why this has bigger implications than just having a neighborhood without lots of trash in the streets.
Yeah.
I put together a presentation for this organization and I started with that, but I realized pretty quickly that for me to share high quality information in Spanish, I spent so many more hours on preparing these things than if I did them in English.
Yeah.
And I felt like that can't be the best use of my time.
Yeah.
There must be someone who already speaks Spanish very fluently, especially these specialized terms that I wasn't familiar with. So I'm looking it up, looking this up, putting it together. Everything's taking me forever. That would be just super fast if I did it in a different language. So I moved away from that and in the end made my peace with what I'm doing, which is dedicating a great portion of my life to something that brings me joy, which is working with dogs and people. And I think for me, one reason that I've been able to make my peace with it is that it's not just playing with puppies.
Right.
And it's also not because in the past I used to tell myself, well, I'm this quote unquote therapist for this one person and their dog and their relationship, right? So I'm making a positive impact in this one person's life. But actually what I'm doing and what I'm doing more and more, the older I get, the more radical I become these days. I used to be radical when I went to the University of Vienna, and then I got mellower, and now I'm becoming more radicalized again. I use dog training basically as a Trojan horse for my political agenda.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Say more about that. I like where this is going. I'm interested.
The students I get are usually highly involved dog people who really want to give their dogs the best lives possible. And I, as a person, am easy to talk to. And I think I've figured out how to create spaces where people feel safe quickly. And part of that is myself being a little bit vulnerable as well, inviting vulnerability from others, creating a basis of trust. And then I'll start inserting little nuggets of anti-capitalist language in the things that I'm communicating, right? And I might first do it jokingly and laugh about it, and then see if the person, quote unquote, bites. And we end up having this other conversation that dog training was just an entry point to. And while what they are paying for is dog training, what actually matters is everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember noticing this way back when I was a baby dog trainer. I was 2014, 2015, when I was still in undergrad, studying dog training and bopping around. And this was still at the phase where I hadn't fully crystallized into a positive reinforcement person. I was shadowing a Schutzhund trainer who was decidedly balanced, if not even, there's not really a good word for I think that farther, more punitive end of balanced. That doesn't sound really judgmental. I just remember kind of at some point starting to realize that it seemed like there was political alignment along with the training philosophies. And I started noticing this even more when I started going out and working with clients, that the more kind of I was in a military town. So a lot of the military families that had a much more authoritarian kind of conservative structure to their household and their overall outlook on life were often more resistant or struggled more with the positive reinforcement approaches that I was suggesting and wanted to tend towards other training approaches. And then when I was talking to like the professors that hired me to work with their dogs, they, obviously I'm broadly generalizing here, but like these really liberal professors were much more apt to kind of understand and hop onto like, oh yeah, we've got to like set the learning environment up for success and try to, make sure that the dog doesn't make mistakes, so and not trying to set up mistakes that can happen so that we can then correct them, or whatever it is. It's really interesting to me how I think a lot of the folks that I really enjoy spending time with in the dog training community are the people who see that really clearly and see dog training as an extension of their politics or a door to their politics. But not everyone sees that, and it's not obvious to everyone, and not everyone is comfortable with it either.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've totally also experienced that. In Austria, when I was trying to get involved with Schutzhund, that was a very right-wing club. I just didn't fit in there.
Yeah.
So, I'm happy with my students tend to be heavy on the positive reinforcement side. So even if they haven't made any political statements or they're still developing their political ideas, if you're already convinced that you want to give your dog the gentlest possible training, it is actually a relatively small leap towards recognizing that humans should also be treated with kindness. And just as every dog would ideally have a good life, every human would ideally have a good life. And then we can start looking into, well, why is that not the case? What would have to change?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think for me, dog training has been the thing that's really brought me back home to these radical politics. Because once you really, really internalize the idea of setting up for success and antecedent arrangement and like wellness first and these sorts of things, and I don't mean wellness in like the white lady woo-woo sense of like, skin creams or Jade, whatever is, I mean, the Sarah Strumming behavioral wellness of like exercise, enrichment, communication, nutrition, a sense of safety and security. I feel like there was a period of time where I was really radical in high school. And then I went off to college and I just got kind of politically disengaged, which is not the way that I think traditionally in the US, at least, most people are more disengaged as high schoolers, maybe get radicalized in college. I went the other way. I was just totally sucked into the outdoor adventure world and kind of forgot about politics and was very absorbed in my own life. And that's fine as a 21-year-old. I'm fine with the fact that my 21-year-old self needed to do that. And sometimes I miss it.
I'm happy for your 21-year-old self.
Yeah. But then I think as I got more and more into dog training and really, really understanding these tenets of animal behavior and welfare and wellness and these things, that was what really brought me home to starting to realize that about other people. Because I think even as I was a little bit of a radical in high school, I wasn't necessarily seeing everything really clearly. And I think I still had a really like paternalistic view to a lot of things. Like definitely a lot of like white savior vibes come from like if I go back and like look at my Facebook posts or whatever from like 2010 or whatever, it's like, oh wow, my heart was in the right place, but I've grown a lot. And again, dog training has just been the venue for that in a way that I wouldn't have expected.
Yeah, totally. It keeps surprising me.
Yeah, it's interesting, for sure. I know. So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot. So here at Oregon State, we'll do like a seminar speaker series for each department. So our department, Fisheries, Wildlife Conservation, every week we'll bring in a guest speaker. They give a lecture on their research, and then students can sign up for lunches and one-on-one meetings and dinners with this person. And it's delightful. It's great free food, and it's one of our graduation requirements as well. And one of our speakers last year was this researcher, Dr. Jingle Wu, who I believe is now out of Arizona. Little Japanese guy. He's in his like 60s, maybe 70s. He's at the point in his career where he's talking about like academic grandchildren. So like his students that have gone on to now become professors and like their PhD students now are his grandkids. He gave this but half of his talk was completely incomprehensible to me because I'm a first-year PhD student and I had no idea what he was talking about. He's like the father of landscape ecology, and I just didn't understand most of what he was talking about on the scale that he was talking about. But the things that stood out to me in his talk were also saying the students that he is proudest of that he has are the students who have now gone into politics and are taking what they've learned in science and learned in landscape ecology and learned in conservation and are trying to exert political change. And I know I was really uncomfortable with that because I was like, oh my God, I'm not here to get a science degree and then go into politics. I really hate this. And I agree with what he was saying. And then the other thing he said that made me really uncomfortable, but I can't stop thinking about, again, he gave this talk probably 5 or 6 months ago now. He made this really impassioned point that basically conservation has failed. We have spent the last however many decades studying the world around us to death, and we have so many papers on the diet of this species and the movement of that species, and we understand a lot about the natural world. And yes, there are still huge gaps. Stick with me on this one because I am obviously still dedicating my life to the ecology conservation side of things. But his point was that as we've been doing all of this, almost every single species on the planet has decreased in abundance. The populations are less healthy, and we have less natural area and less habitat for almost all of these species. And even the species that have rebounded, that maybe were in a worse situation in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, because we do have these amazing conservation stories of species that have been brought back from the brink, or maybe are still they're still in dire straits, but they're trending in the right direction. But I think his overall point really stuck with me and made me really uncomfortable. But I think is right that there gets to be a point where we need these advocates who are able to turn the science into action. And maybe some of the funding dollars shouldn't always be going towards trying to understand these complicated, super nuanced interactions between animals and plants and the environment or whatever, but actually focusing on, could we take that same money and that same effort to just get an area protected so that we have the opportunity to look at these animals again in 10 years? It's just really stuck with me as something that I want to try to figure out how to incorporate into my career. And then on the flip side, one of the things I found really interesting in my department here at Oregon State is, so we're the Department of Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation, and we are within the School of Agriculture. So to call someone an advocate in this department is an insult. You know, a lot of people are really focused on managing wildlife and managing forests. You know, people talk, it's kind of a joke, but kind of not, about we've got tree farms here. And, you know, obviously we do to some degree have literal tree farms that are being harvested. Yeah. But some of it is also we're managing these forests that, yes, house all of these other animals. We've got the marbled murrelets and the spotted owls and all of this other stuff. But we're also farming trees, and, you know, money grows on trees in Oregon. And it's been a really interesting and uncomfortable fit for me as someone who does, I think, naturally much more align with the conservationist advocate side of things.
So when you say managing or management, that makes me think of management and dog training.
Oh, yeah. And it's a totally different thing here, kind of.
Tell me what exactly you mean with managing a forest.
Yeah, so managing a forest, or managing like a wildlife species in this case, is, I mean, I guess we'll have to see how related we think it is as I explain this, is the idea of, okay, so we've got the state of Oregon and we want this many deer and this many elk and this many wolves and this many pumas, because we believe that we have done the math and we've done the modeling, and these numbers are going to interact appropriately in a way that we have enough deer and elk left over, that people can have successful hunting seasons, but not so many that they're overgrazing and competing with the cattle and making the ranchers mad. And then we need some wolves because the predator people have succeeded in making the argument that that is part of a healthy ecosystem, but not too many wolves, because then again, they kill the cattle, or they kill too many deer and then people lose their minds because they can't have a successful deer hunt in the fall.
So essentially playing God over the state of Oregon.
Correct. Yes. And that is like the North American model of wildlife management. And I have not yet taken like a history class on this sort of thing, so I'm a little out of my depth. And if I am misrepresenting something and you're screaming at me right now, please just message me. I'm thrilled to learn. I am like still pretty new to this because, again, like my undergraduate degree was in conservation, which is much more the idea of corridors and like minimum populations needed to like sustain things, and evolutionary bottlenecks. And also just, you know, what's the difference between a lemur and a squirrel? How do you tell the difference based on looking at a skull? That was an exam I had once. But yeah, so here it's much more focused on like the wildlife and forestry management side of things. So trying to figure out how to play God to balance capital and human needs and the needs of wildlife. And again, it's interesting to me how being an advocate in this space is a dirty word. the bend is really heavily towards capital and human needs. And I think a lot of times even capital over human needs.
So sustainability is not part of playing God.
I mean, yeah, I don't want to paint this too negatively, at least here at Oregon State from what I've seen so far. Sustainability, I think, is one of those words that would probably get argued about ad nauseum if I had 3 other people from my department in this room. Sustainability for whom and for which use? Because the sustainability for maximizing the financial gain of a timber harvest while minimizing the harm to wildlife is not the same as sustainability for maximizing the success of wildlife.
Yes, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So, I think there is a lot of focus on sustainable forestry management here. And there is something I admire about the pragmatism of, okay, we live in a world where logging and paper products and wood products are needed. So how do we balance that with wildlife needs? And are there ways to have sustainable timber harvests that minimize the damage or reduce or mitigate the damage to wildlife or an endangered shrub or whatever it is? Yeah, I don't know. I've kind of lost my train of thought.
If you came in there to someone arguing, I'm managing this forest and I'm looking for this kind of sustainability you just described. If you came in there with your advocate hat on, what would you tell this person?
One of the things that I have had a discussion with is, do we really want to be managing our ecosystem in a way that we're more focused on whether or not hunters are getting deer tags than whether or not we have thriving predator populations? And, who is most important here and whose voices matter the most? I think that is the question that I find myself asking the most often, is just kind of raising my hand and being like, should we have someone here at the table whose job it is to try to speak for the trees or speak for the wolves or speak for, I'm just the little Lorax person in some of these spaces. And that tends to be well received. We have a lot of healthy debates, but I think most of the ultimate decisions still trend towards capital more than I personally would be comfortable with. I'm also not actually in decision-making rooms. So all of this for me is still very theoretical. I'm a first-year PhD student. Nobody listens to me. And they shouldn't, probably at this point. But hopefully, as I know more and continue advocating, hopefully that will matter.
Yeah. I like that idea that you expressed earlier, that we can either we can either be the documenters of the apocalypse, or we can try to create spaces where we can have longitudinal studies and the same animals will still be around in 10 years, or the same plants.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a good place for the grant money to go.
Yeah.
Both ways, right?
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, we want to do away with capitalism, so we also won't have any grant money and you won't need it.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's the bigger goal.
Yeah. And I think sometimes in the conservation advocate space, there is a nervousness around addressing capitalism, for sure, head on, and then also talking about the trade-offs and the very real trade-offs that can occur. Particularly indigenous communities have historically gotten hit really hard with conservation approaches because, we march in and John Muir is famous for this. He thought that the Native Americans living in Yosemite were scourge who were ruining basically ruining the vibes of Yosemite. And that's a really gross legacy that conservation, I don't think, has appropriately grappled with. And the tendency has been for, I think, some of the really gung-ho advocates, and we see this in the positive reinforcement dog training community too, they're so focused on the dog welfare or saving X species that they are upset at the question of what happens to the locals.
Yeah.
And they get dismissive of it. And that is a really, again, it's an ugly habit and something that is really uncomfortable. And then I think then there are other people who have potentially rose-tinted glasses that believe that maybe we can capitalize on conservation. I think there are people who really believe that tourism dollars and ecotourism is going to save the planet. Or they believe that it is always possible to find a solution that supports indigenous communities and supports capital and keeps the wildlife safe and happy. And I think the reality lies somewhere else, that there are sometimes losers.
Yeah.
I think we want to strive for that happy balance. But the reality is the population of human beings that we have on this planet, if we want to protect some wild spaces, That does mean there are places that people can't hunt and people can't go, or it needs to be heavily managed. And everywhere on the earth has someone who's local there. And like, God, I don't know. I feel like I'm putting my foot in my mouth now over something that like I'm not much of an expert over, but it is a really ugly, complicated, hard series of questions about how to protect wildlife and trees and whatever around Indigenous communities, and particularly like as white people coming in and like often putting either capital or wildlife over Indigenous people. It's a really ugly history that is not actually in the past.
Oh yeah, I wasn't aware of that history. I'm not gonna have to go Google after.
Yeah, I just finished reading the book Beloved Beasts by Michelle. Her last name starts with N and has like a J and a K in it, and it's kind of hard to pronounce, and I don't have it in front of me. But yeah, the book is Beloved Beast, and it goes through a lot of this history, and she does a good job of also looking at like Kenya's colonialist history and how, you know, like the Maasai were totally pushed out of their traditional grounds as part of like these conservation efforts that then led to the Maasai, I believe it was the Maasai, gosh, I hope I'm getting the tribe right, you know, then killed a rhino in retaliation. And like this approach can really, really backfire. And it has really, really ugly colonialist roots that I think a lot of conservationists don't want to look at. I know I don't like looking at that sort of history.
Yeah, but it's probably important to look at it and learn from it.
Yeah, because if you don't know what it looks like in the 60s or the 1860s, where it's really obvious, then it's going to be very, very hard to see that same rhetoric when it comes up today. But the more you can recognize those really obvious through lines that come again through reading like the last 150 years of conservation history, it makes it a lot easier to pick up on some of those dog whistles or similar lines of thinking in meetings that happen today.
Yeah. So to go back to the beginning of our conversation, how do you currently grapple with the fact that you're, for example, now leaving for Alaska to do island hopping and collect wolf scat versus the fact that 10 years from now, maybe there won't be any wolves left in that region?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the little like stoic version of my mantra that I've been talking myself through is that me going there and doing the best science that I can is a step. Like, I think I'm not the superhero in any story. I'm not the main character in any story. And I think one of the things I do struggle with, honestly, with this Alaska project is the worry that it's inconsequential. Wolves are studied to death and managed to death, and people have such strong opinions about them already. I honestly feel a little prematurely bummed that I don't think it's going to do much for conservation. But one of the beautiful things about, at least right now, being in my PhD is that I know I'm in school right now. I'm in training right now, and it's okay if my basically grown-up science fair project doesn't change the world yet, if it gives me the skills and the connections to take that elsewhere and have a more impactful project. I think I'm okay with that right now.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I've been fighting so hard to make sure that this El Salvador project happens. When I talk to people about my PhD, I tell them about the Alaska project. And then I say, and then I'm going to go to El Salvador and do pumas. Like almost everyone who's done a PhD or is even just a couple of years into a PhD is like, why are you doing two projects? Shouldn't you just pick one? And they're probably right. But my argument and like my belief right now for why I'm continuing forward with the El Salvador project is because I really strongly feel that there is a stronger possibility of impact in that project. And if nothing else, us coming in there and helping with Fundación Naturaleza El Salvador, like they are inviting us to come. They have asked for us to come, and we are able to bring in grant money and support staff and like the detection dogs that they never in a gajillion years were going to be able to afford to have in country. So yeah, I think like I'm kind of constantly balancing all of those things, a little bit of despair over the wolf question. I don't really feel like this is going to do anything. And there's a good chance that Barley finds that the wolf population is higher than they previously thought, which will then lead to more wolf trapping and hunting than there was before, which, my job as a scientist, I guess, is to report that anyway. And even though I'm not stoked about it, but, thinking about it as like, it's school. I'm here to learn and to progress and take those skills forward into something that I really feel like could change the world, I guess is okay right now.
Yeah, I think that's the best possible attitude you could land on.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's hard. And again, especially when you hear like Jingle Woo talking about getting more involved in politics, and like politics in the US is just so depressing and ugly right now. I've been going to the anti-genocide protests every Saturday since October, and I guess not every Saturday. I've missed some, but I just kind of like, I've gotten cynical about it. It's like, all right, I'm going to put on my kufiyah and go out and scream into the void for an hour every Saturday. And then I come back and I go back to my grant writing, and it's what I can do. There's a part of me that every once in a while is like, I'm a wilderness first responder. Like, I should figure out if there's a way that I can like fundraise and go do mutual aid somewhere and like be an aid worker somewhere that like feels so much more pressing than learning about statistical modeling or whatever it is I'm currently doing. But I don't know. I guess I haven't decided that is the crazy 180 my life is going to take, at least right now.
Yeah, and you can still do that.
Yeah, I always can quit and go be an aid worker.
Yeah, people in need of aid are in no short supply. And
yeah,
probably going to be more and more.
Yeah. And I mean, I do really appreciate, as I'm very baby into some of the more like anarchist thoughts that I have been getting exposed to over the last couple of years. Like, I haven't read the texts, I haven't learned the things yet, but I do find the concept of mutual aid just as a starting point really, really helpful. And just like, okay, can I focus on my community and what are the small things that I can do in my community without ballooning it up and making it more complicated than it needs to be?
Like I'm in the same position in that respect. I feel like an anarchist and mutual aid take on things also gives you permission to focus on what's right in front of you rather than spiral out because the entire world is going to shit and it's overwhelming.
Yeah. Like yesterday on my way home from agility with Barley, which is a thing I spend money on every week, and that the money could be donated elsewhere, but we do agility. And every once in a while I spiral about that too. We've got lots of things to spiral about lately.
Oh, yeah.
But, like I stopped at the grocery store and I bought a couple packs of apple juice and some granola bars because we've been ordering so much field supply lately that I realized yesterday when my Chewy box with Barley's food wasn't brought all the way up to our porch. And I was like, oh my God, I've just completely forgotten about the human being delivery workers that are carrying like multiple 80-pound packages that I've ordered over the last couple weeks up to my porch every single day.
Yeah.
And like, I need to put out some snacks for these people. Like, it's not much. And like, hopefully they like apple juice. I don't know. I was like, what are some shelf stable snacks that I can put out for delivery workers? I don't know what I need. But just thinking through things like that and remembering the ways that there are other people all around you that you can just do little things to make their lives better. Like Margaret Killjoy, who's the host of Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff, often talks about beauty and art and poetry being important parts of our wellness and resistance and like joy, and you only have one life. And I guess I find those things really helpful to keep in mind as well, that like I don't have to be changing the world at every minute. I can just get someone some apple juice.
Yeah.
Or whatever, take some pictures of flowers on my walk with Barley. That's okay too.
Yeah.
It's needed. It's not just okay.
And also, for myself, for example, I can go to a protest, but I do not have the spoons to organize one.
Totally.
Recognizing things like that is, I believe, really important too, because if we push ourselves beyond our own limits all the time, we'll burn out. For me, part of my balance is that I get to do a lot of things that bring me joy, that involve dogs, currently puppies. That is not changing the world, but it is recharging for me as a person. And it is giving me both the energy and the memories that will propel me forward in other aspects in the future.
Yeah. I have two opposing ideas right now. On one hand, things like the climate crisis and the many other biodiversity crisis and the ways that those are impacting humans around the world and war. Those are really real emergencies that it's okay to feel stressed out by those and to feel a strong need and want to do something. And that's where I've come down on the protests for myself right now, is like, I do this because it allows me to maybe occasionally skip some videos that come up on my social media feed that I find upsetting, because watching them doesn't actually help anyone.
No, it doesn't help. It's just virtue signaling if people repost and blah, blah.
Yeah. And, I still share some of the good infographics. But So on one hand, there are a lot of really big emergencies that like we maybe kind of should, and I'm hesitant to use the word should, but I'm going to use it here, be stressed about and be worried about and like be doing stuff about.
Yeah.
But I also don't think that we want to make it a prerequisite for activism that we apply this like hyper capitalist hustle culture to activism as well. Like that is actually not the point either.
Yeah, I agree.
We want to live happy, beautiful, hard lives however we can. And some of that is going to be a struggle and fighting, and some of it should be going outside with your dog.
I agree, totally agree. And also part of it is like nobody has to remind me that there are so many hugely stressful things happening, not to me personally, because I'm very privileged, but to a whole lot of people and other animals. I feel like we can hold that knowledge and at the same time still enjoy the sunset.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of being a complex living being. Who said that? Our minds contain multitudes.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm terrible at remembering who said quotes. Mark Twain? Isn't that the joke? Just attribute everything to Mark Twain.
I feel like even if you take a picture of a flower or you run agility, it's not that you forget that this is also the case. It's not possible to forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree, compartmentalization and finding places to be just one with your body and engrossed in things is really important. I know I've recently had the realization that the feeling that I chase with all of my recreation is the feeling of being so engrossed in something that I literally can't have my phone involved. And whether that's running agility with the dogs, or the conservation dog, you know, handling stuff, or surfing, or rock climbing, or whitewater kayaking, or mountain biking. Like, I think like that feeling that I chase with a lot of my adventure sports is partially an anxiety response for me of I need to find these things to do with my body and my mind so that I have to stop thinking about what needs to be done. And part of that is a lot of like really intense internalized hustle culture. And then that combining with this anxiety about the status of the world right now. And every once in a while, I just like, you know, remember some genocide somewhere or some struggle somewhere and just feel like nauseous about not being able to do anything about it. But also like, I don't know. So like finding those ways to compartmentalize and be happy in my own head is also important so that, as you said, like you can come back and do something the next day or the next hour or whatever it is.
Yeah, and you need those times where you turn off your mind in order to be able to keep coming back.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, at some point, you're going to jump off a cliff.
Yeah. Like I laugh, but yes, absolutely.
That doesn't help anyone.
No, it sure doesn't.
Just as your worries don't help anyone as long as they're in your head. So it makes more sense to do something to shut them off for a little bit so that the next day you actually have energy to do something rather than just think something.
Yeah. Maybe we can bring this back to dogs. Like that's a huge component of successful dog training for any hard thing.
Yeah.
You're not spending 8 hours a day trying to drill your dog on that intensive obedience routine or the conservation dog stuff. A huge part of it is making sure that they're rested and maybe some stretching and some massage and that they get a good decompression walk and they get to run around like idiots in the woods for a while.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's what allows them to go back to work. We're in the midst of our conservation dog handler course right now. And one of our students during our live call this week asked how much time on average we're spending training our dogs. And I was like, oh, half hour a day, 4 to 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Most of the students were like, wait, that's it? And I was like, yeah. Planning the training sessions and coding the video afterwards might take longer. And it still feels like it somehow takes 2 hours out of my day. But when I watch the video back, you know, from unclipping the leash and telling the dog to search to clipping the leash and putting the dog away is 10 to 40 minutes on average.
Yeah, and all the best trainers don't spend more time than this.
Yeah, the only reason it's getting longer this week is because we're intentionally working on building up Barley's endurance again to get him ready for doing 2-hour searches.
Yeah.
By necessity, that means some of our training is going to have to go long.
Yeah.
But that's also, I think, when I say 2 hours of training for that particular sort of thing, it's not the same thing as like drilling weave poles for 2 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Most of it is Barley walking around in the woods, kind of passively sniffing. He's not super actively sniffing at most of those points. And then occasionally he'll hit odor and he'll go and he'll take me to it.
Yeah.
And then he gets to play and then we start all over again. It is intensive. They're exhausted after that 2 hours, but it's not like super active training.
Yeah, and it's very, if you compare it with weave poles are something we humans made up, right?
Yeah.
But using your nose to find something is not something we've made up. And running through the woods is not something we've made up.
Yeah.
That's quite different in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hopefully less hard on their bodies.
No, I would assume so.
Yeah. I think it kind of depends on your dog's tendencies and what's happening in the wilderness at any given moment.
Yeah.
Theoretically, they're on uneven, soft surfaces. That's really good for joints and stability and building their bodies up. They're happy. They're a good, happy tired. Like Barley is also tired after we fly internationally, but it's a different sort of tired.
Oh, yeah.
When he's come home from a good long day of searching.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my kind of tired after flying is also, that's not a good tired.
No.
That was another thing that when I had that crisis after reading The Uninhabitable Earth a couple years ago, I was like, I can't in good conscience fly again. And I did not fly for a few years. And then I realized whether I fly or don't fly does not change anything. There are 3 people in Austria who I would like to see every now and then.
Yeah, and there's not really a way to get to Austria without flying. Like, realistically. You technically can. Yeah,
you technically can. It's not realistic for me. I've given myself permission to fly and not worry about that. Sometimes it's got to come down to that.
Yeah, I know I've thought about this when I chose to drive a diesel vehicle to Panama and the Arctic Ocean. I think one of the things that I have found a little comforting that, again, like baby activist me when I was like 17, 18, 19, didn't quite fully understand yet, was the degree to which these problems are systemic.
Yeah.
That can be really depressing and terrifying to just realize the degree to which whether or not I recycle just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But it also can be kind of freeing, I think.
Yeah.
There's this balance of like, you only live once and you deserve to have a good life. But don't be Sam Bankman-Fried. Like, don't tell yourself you're doing effective altruism while all you're doing is scamming people out of millions of dollars and living a life of luxury in the Bahamas.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of our listeners are doing that. If Sam Bankman-Fried listens to this podcast, I would love to know. But yeah, it sounds kind of like that's what you're talking about. We can be responsible, caring global citizens, or whatever term you want to use, community members, without never allowing ourselves to do anything nice or like eat some chocolate or drink coffee or whatever. Even if you know that, like, oh my God, every time I eat a banana, I think about genocide. It's just like, but you know what? They're delicious. And every once in a while, I'm going to get some bananas as part of my groceries.
Yeah, because also like you not eating bananas, it
doesn't help. It doesn't matter.
So what matters is spreading the knowledge that these problems are systemic and seeing if we can come across ways to pull a little bit on that systemic issue, even if it's just disturbing it a little bit, making like a little bit of a, what is that, a wave?
Yeah, like a ripple.
A ripple, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's what I try to do in my interactions with my friends, or like what you were saying you do with your clients, you know, just dropping in a little bit of like an anti-capitalist side comment and seeing how they react to that and maybe opening that door just a little bit.
Yeah.
Just seeing if they want to take that step forward and ask, what do you mean by that? Or like, oh yeah, you know, it does seem like needing to work for a living is part of the problem here. Or,
yes.
You know,
yes. Absolutely. And we have a conversation and then they go on with their lives. But maybe for some of them that sparks something and they keep investigating or keep thinking. That's what I hope.
Yeah. Well, and how I have been really guided along this thought process has been the podcast Behind the Bastards. I started listening to it when my ex and I were first driving to Panama. So this was back in 2017. We started listening to it together. And it was honestly part of the thing that led me to that breakup as well, because I started realizing that my boyfriend at the time, was very, very focused on accruing wealth and hustle culture. And I started realizing that I wasn't interested in that lifestyle the same way he was. And a huge part of that was just casual side comments made on Behind the Bastards. And then over the 7 or so years since then, that podcast has gotten, I think, more openly anti-central power systems. And once I liked and trusted that host enough, I started listening to other podcasts within their network. And that has what's really gotten me going on thinking about these things. I would imagine, I guess, I can't say I'm sure because I don't know him, but I'm sure there were probably times that this host back in 2016, 2017, when it was just people talking about bad people in history, I can imagine feeling like, what am I doing with my life? Am I really making the change that I want to see in this world? And like, they have figured out how to do it. And they definitely at least opened the door for me. And I'm sure for many, many, many other listeners to kind of go back and examine some of those things. That was a very long explanation. I'm sorry.
I agree, yeah. You become a multiplier of thoughts that may ripple and change things because they lead to actions, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. And it's okay if it doesn't for everyone.
No, it won't for everyone. We're not important enough to make that big a difference, but we can do what we can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, again, as I get older, I get both more radical in my own politics, but also more understanding of other people.
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of matured. And that's what to me kind of feels like part of the radicalization is understanding everyone else's agency and where they're coming from. My favorite word is Sonder, which is the understanding of everyone else's life being as complex and three-dimensional and rich as your own.
How is that spelled? Sonder?
Sonder, Sonder. I tried to figure out how to make that the name of my dog training business, and it just like didn't really
That's an amazing
roll off.
word. Thank you.
Oh, it's such a good word. Yeah. Yeah. And I've got friends who used to be more radical and are now focused on getting pregnant and having kids. I think younger me would have struggled with that and felt like they're abandoning the cause or whatever, but like they're dedicating their lives towards building a family and being happy with that. I'm not convinced that me being so much more stressed and focused on the things that I'm stressed and focused on is better for anyone, including the planet or me.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not doubting myself necessarily, but I guess like trying to extend that grace to people that, again, I think a younger me would have struggled to see friends making that shift.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen that too. Now why was I thinking about this the other day? Oh yeah, because of how I'm socializing my puppies. I'm socializing them even though they haven't had their first vaccine yet. I was explaining on the blog post I wrote on their 3rd week of life why this is important to me and also why I believe that someone choosing to do things in a very different way should be able to do so too.
Mm-hmm.
And that what I'm really feeling strongly about is not that things should be done my way, but that people get to do things their way.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's that sentiment. And I think there's variation in human behavior and in the behavior of individuals because there has to be, because otherwise the species wouldn't get anywhere.
Totally.
And that's in a way part of that some people go and have kids and other people get stressed and worried about the burning forests and the rising sea levels and the genocide.
Yeah.
And take your pick. Yeah.
And some people do both and some people oscillate between the two and some people probably do neither.
Oh yeah, so there's someone sitting in a hammock on the Bahamas right now with a cocktail.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I love cosplaying as that person every so often. I think that's also really good for you. So okay, I think we should probably start wrapping up here. Do you have takeaways? Do you have tips? Do you have other thoughts, questions?
My tip would just be to only follow laws that make sense.
I like that.
Most laws don't make any sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one small way that you can start undermining the system that is actually damaging to most of us.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything quite that clear as a tip. I think just figure out what feels good to you at this moment and try to feel okay pursuing what feels good and doable to you right now. And if that's protesting every single day and dropping everything else, great. And if that's throwing yourself into training for a Canicross event with your dog, like, also great.
Yeah. Oh, one more thing. I was talking to Shuli Branson the other day. She reminded me of something that I think is really important. Try to get out of the scarcity culture mindset.
Mm-hmm.
If you have more than you need, like apple juice, share it with your delivery person. There's no reason to hoard stuff, including money.
Yes.
If I have more than I need right now and you have less than you need, I want to share it with you.
Yeah. No, I really like that. Well, Caden, where can people find you online? I know, so people from my podcast feed should figure out where your podcast feed is and vice versa.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, my podcast is called Our One Wild and Precious Lives and Our Dogs. And otherwise, I'm A Dog is a Bond Between Strangers on Instagram and Caden Christopher on Facebook without an H. And my website is adventuredogsanarchy.com.
Ooh, I haven't seen your new website. I'm gonna have to check that out. Yeah, and we're Collies Without Borders on Instagram, which is a name that I picked before I really started getting super anti-border. And now I'm really glad I've got it.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it was totally a play on border collies that travel, and now I'm like, no, actually, screw international borders. They just do bad things. So yeah, that's my Instagram is probably where you're going to hear more of the conversations that are akin to this, and then officially, professionally, I am at Canine Conservationists for everything else. It's the name of the podcast. It's the website. You'll find all of the stuff there. And that's, the more we talk about dogs and conservation there, and that's about it. Yeah. No, thank you so much for this conversation. I found this, it's just one of the things I hate, I guess, about being in the sciences. And part of this is maybe also just being in a PhD program is I just feel, oh my God, I feel so siloed right now. Like it's just, I miss having these sorts of conversations, and thank you for being willing to share one with me, because it's they can be hard to find. People are tired and don't always want to have this sort of conversation.
I imagine,
and that's totally fair.
No, that was an excellent way to spend a Tuesday morning. Thanks and it's nice to catch up with Annie, as always.
Yeah, always good to see you. Tell the puppies how much I love them.
I will. I'm really sad that my camera isn't working. I can't show them to you.
I know. Well, the Instagram algorithm seems to have figured out that I am interested in your puppies. So whenever I open Instagram, I just see your puppies. Excellent. So it's great. So, all right, everyone. I hope that you're feeling inspired to get outside and be a canine conservationist in whatever way suits your passions and skill set. And when I say that, I really mean that. Like all the stuff we talked about in this episode counts. So, yeah, we'll talk to y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.